Words matter. At the beginning of Scripture, God created the entire world, brought everything into existence through the power of words. We may not be like God, nor may our clients be, but still our words bring things into existence. And one of the things when it comes to language that we need to pay attention to as coaches are the distinctions that our clients can sometimes miss about their words. So let's talk about 4 distinctions that matter. This is really about how to listen to your clients so that you can help evoke awareness for them and help them move toward their goals. So these are distinctions that matter. We need to pay attention to these as coaches. So one of the distinctions I really pay attention to are the pronouns that a client uses. And what I mean here is between the kind of personal, singular first person pronoun. That's the phrase I'm looking for, and more of the second or third person pronouns. This talks about belonging. And so if I'm working with a leader and they are talking about the organization they lead, and they're talking about we need to do this, very different than if they're talking about they need to do this. You really see this a lot of times when a person is new to an organization. Maybe they're feeling excluded from a family. Maybe they belong to a church, but they don't feel like they belong to the church. They're going to use they language versus we language. And so we notice that kind of thing as coaches, and we just point it out. We just make an observation, and then we can explore that with the client. A second kind of distinction that's important would be the difference between considering and deciding. Now, this isn't really the distinction of what words specifically the client uses. Are they saying I'm considering, or are they saying I'm deciding? It's more of we have to be aware of the distinction that those are 2 different processes. So if a client is considering an action, we need to coach them through the consideration process. So maybe they're considering whether to take a new job or not, or they're considering whether to apply for a new job. Okay, we're going to want to help them process through and come to the decision about that. If they've already decided to seek a new job, then we're going to coach them to design the actions related to that. So that's a subtle distinction, but man, it's important, because if we jump into assuming that they have already decided and they're actually still considering, we're going to go in circles, or we're going to coach them into something they haven't really felt a strong sense of buy-in with. So pay attention to when your clients are considering versus when they are deciding or have decided and are ready to move into designing actions. A third distinction is the distinction between retrieving and discovering. And again, this isn't necessarily the language that the client uses. This is more of the mental process that they are employing. So we often are asking our clients questions designed to help them use the discovery part of their brain. That is, they need to be creative, they need to be resourceful, they need to imagine something. But instead, our client is using more the retrieving part of their brain. That is, they're remembering something, they're pulling something out that they already know or they've already experienced. For example, I asked a client recently about boundaries, and I said, how would your life be different if you have better boundaries at home? And instead of imagining this sort of future possibility, instead she went back to when she had needed some boundaries, and somebody in her family crossed a boundary and it kind of ticked her off, and she was retrieving, which that's not necessarily making the client morally wrong or something. That's not like God doesn't like her because she did that. It's just not as productive in the coaching conversation. So what I did was I gently said, so that's what happened. I'm asking you to imagine what could happen differently if you had better boundaries. And so just gently guided her to make the switch from retrieving to discovering. It's a distinction that really matters. And a fourth distinction that matters is the distinction around motivation. And so, and what I mean here is the distinction really between a client knowing something sort of rationally, logically, and a client actually being motivated emotionally. So a lot of times we'll have clients who know rationally what they should do. They know what would work. They can come up with a plan and again, the sort of left side of their brain says, yes, that's a good plan. That should work. They've got that Mr. Spock part of their brain that says this is logical. And yet they don't take the action. And the reason they don't take the action is just because something makes sense rationally, logically, to that part of our brain, doesn't mean that they actually have the emotional motivation to carry out the plan. And a lot of times the lack of emotional motivation is a signal that something about that course of action is off for them, or something's missing for them to enable them or allow them to take the action. And so the distinction's helpful in coaching, because just because your client is, again, logically kind of saying, yeah, this is a good plan, this should work, I'm going to do that, don't assume they're going to do it. Check for the motivation. Those are two different things. By the way, they're both important. So a client can be all, juiced up emotionally and be motivated to take an action. It just could be a really bad action because it doesn't make any kind of logical or rational sense. And so you need both of those. Don't confuse them for one another. There's a distinction. There's a difference between being rationally, on board with something and really having that kind of emotional driver that's going to move a person forward to take an action. So hopefully those 4 distinctions will help you be an even better coach for the people that you work with. They need you to listen and tease out these distinctions and leverage them to help evoke awareness for the client so they can move toward their goals.
Be sure and subscribe so you don't miss any of our great content.